Okay, we are live. Good evening, everyone, on this Saturday evening. Here in February, I think it's the last Saturday of February, so this month, as usual, is marching on right into March. For tonight, my guest is I have horror author. He has written books such as Shadow of the Wolves, the Bounty and the Bones, along with Fortress of the Damned. Welcome, J.R. White. How are you doing this evening, J.R.?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm happy to be here and to talk about, horror and the books and just have a good time.
Excellent. And I was like looking at your bio on your Amazon's author page, and for those of you, I've put a link to JR's author page in the main video description if you want to click on that. But it shows you as being a sailor, a scientist, and a professional cage fighter. So you are definitely a man of many talents there. Which one are you currently are? Or are you still all three?
um, so currently I'm primarily writing. Um, I was I've just been a lot of things over the years. My first
Mhm.
job was like as a farmhand at like 11 years old or something. I got paid $2 a day. But I was a sailor. I trained to get my third mate's license on limited
Mhm.
tonnage. I went to Texas A&M for that and did 4 voyages at sea. They're like 10 weeks each. And then, got to see a lot of cool places, but I met a girl, so I didn't actually sail professionally after I graduated
Right.
because all the other sailors I knew were either unhappily married or happily divorced. So I decided not to to go that route.
Yeah, that's probably not an occupation that lends itself to having a strong, healthy relationship with. Well, that's cool. Texas
Yeah.
A&M. My wife's a big A&M fan, so I'll have to
Ah, cool.
tell her that later on tonight. Hey, talk to someone who went to A&M. So excellent. So when did you? Obviously, you're a writer, but before that, you obviously at some point became a horror fan. When exactly did that happen for you?
Well, my so becoming a fan of horror for me had kind of like two distinct sections. I fell in love with horror in like writing very very early.
Hmm.
My school had like the scary stories to tell in the dark books,
Yeah.
right? And like the
Hmm.
old school ones with the horrifying drawings on the cover, not the like toned down ones that came later.
Right.
And
Right.
so I got into those, into reading you just scary stories, campfire stories. My school had all these books that they were sort of like the forerunner of novelizations of like the universal horror movie
Hmm.
monsters, like Dracula and the Mummy and all that stuff.
I've read
And
those too as a kid. Yeah.
yeah, they had all the pictures and everything, and it just that kind of got me hooked. Um, but as far as like really learning to love horror on film in movies, um, that happened for me probably around like 6th grade. I got invited to a birthday party
Hmm.
and ended up becoming best friends with the guy whose birthday party it was. He and I were both uh, we were both scared to watch the movie that all the other friends were playing in the other room. They were playing Friday the 13th Part 2,
Okay.
right? And so he and I hung out in the kitchen because we were too wussy to watch the movie, and we'd stick our heads around the corner from time to time. And anyone who's seen the movie knows that Jason, before he gets his trademark hockey mask, has this like gunny sack with one eye hole.
Right. Right.
And my newfound best friend goes, "Hey, I've got a gunny sack. We should do you up like Jason. And as soon as the credits roll, we should just go in there and just scare the crap out of everybody." So that's what we did. We we did me up in the gunny sack with the hole in for the eye, and as soon as the credits rolled, everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, that was intense!" Because they're all a bunch of 6th graders.
Right.
I come running around the corner screaming, and a guy named Dave, who was the biggest kid in our 6th grade, chucked me like a loaf of bread. I mean, he just, I came running at him and he just grabbed me and just shot
Oh
putted me
my
across the couch. Um, but so I've always come, and since then we watched a bunch of horror movies.
Mhm.
I especially like creature features, Jaws, werewolf movies, The Thing, stuff like that. And there's always been to me just a real fun social aspect of getting together with friends and watching a horror movie. And I think it's funny, man. If you do it that way, there's really not any bad horror movies, right? Because if it's good for everybody, and if it's bad, you can sit there and beat the crap out of it.
There might be certain like horror movies that might not. Well, you know what? You're probably right. I was like trying to think of like some movies that might be, not lend themselves to being a group setting, like a movie like Hereditary, for example, is the first one that
Yeah,
pops in my mind. But who knows?
yeah,
You might have a few people laugh during the most horrific part of it, involving the car that might think that might be funny. I don't know.
yeah. You never know. You never know. I know. One of the things with horror movies that was a real fun period in my life was when me and my wife first started dating.
Hmm.
Was right around that time where, like, guys of our vintage remember when Blockbuster was trying to compete with Netflix.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
I
you
can
could get a
remember.
Blockbuster membership and you could check out 2 movies at a time, just whatever you wanted. So we had burned through all the movies that she wanted to see at Blockbuster. And so we started getting into the horror movies. She had never seen a zombie movie in
Oh
her
wow.
life. And over the period of a week, we watched all the George Romeros, um, and the Return of the Living Dead and all
Hmm.
this. And now she won't watch them with me anymore. It was too heavy of a dose at once. Um, but that was fun because you would try horror movies you wouldn't have otherwise tried because it
Hmm.
didn't feel like you were spending more money to do it.
Right.
And so the worst horror movie I've ever seen, I got from Blockbuster in Galveston, Texas, and it was El Chupacabra.
I've heard of it, but haven't seen it.
There's an intersection here
Hmm.
between one of the worst injuries I ever sustained on the mats as a martial artist
Oh wow.
and this movie El Chupacabra. So I'll have to tell this story.
Okay.
So it's a terrible movie. It's like really bad. Like boom mics coming down, out of the, coming into frame. Um, there's a scene where 2 guys are being filmed through the glass of like a containment area where the chupacabra is, and they are very obviously reading their lines off of a clipboard.
Oh
Um,
no.
there's a scene where the main hero is giving his big heroic rant and just forgets his lines. So there's this inexplicable, like, 5-second pause, and then he launches in and finishes it. And they left it in the movie, but the monster costume was actually pretty good,
Oh, okay.
right?
They got
It
that
was this,
right.
yeah, it was this spiny, fangy, gnarly little, kangaroo monster thing. The problem is they insisted on filming it from behind whenever it was attacking someone, and I swear to God, it had a zipper with the flap, right? And this thing is really bouncy. So it's the zippers flapping like this as it's attacking people. And the way this led to a horrific injury for me was I was at a jujitsu practice that I was teaching one day. And, we're all sitting around BSing at the beginning of practice. And the topic of, hey, what's the worst movie you've ever seen pops up. And I go, oh, I got to tell you guys about El Chupacabra. And I hunched over and I did an impression, including with my hand going like this behind my head of the zipper. And I tried to do an impression of the costume and I threw my back out so bad. And I
Oh
tried to
god.
hide it. I made it about 25 minutes into practice, sweat pouring off of me just from trying to keep it together. And I told him, I'm sorry, guys. I'm just going to have to sit over here while you finish because I hurt myself doing the El
Oh
Chupacabra impression.
God.
Yeah.
Well, no, there's a way to remember a movie. Then your worst injury ever linked to the worst horror movie you ever watched. So when did your like? Well, I guess you kind of like explained your the writing you had started really as a kid in
Yeah.
school. But what made you want to start actually writing a book?
Well, I had written a book like my first year in college, and it was terrible. It'll never see the light of day. There are surviving
Mm,
copies on floppy disks somewhere.
okay.
Um, but it wasn't very good. But it proved to me that I could write a book length manuscript. And I was like, okay, well, I just need to keep working on this and get better. I was always really good at telling stories, but telling a story that long with all the
Mm-hmm.
pieces fitting together properly,
Right.
is a separate skill than coming on YouTube and telling a chupacabra story.
Right.
So I started work in earnest on my first real book, Shadow of Wolves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Soon after college, I started writing that book like 2006, and it came out really nice. I was really happy with it. I kept tweaking it and working on it, and I tried
Mm-hmm.
to float it out to traditional publishers, right? And their response was kind of along the lines when I got a response of like, we're not looking for a Western with a werewolf in it, you know?
Oh.
So, so I just, I sat on it. I was like, okay. And I kept polishing it and making it better. And then the plague years came, right? And suddenly I was living in Maryland at the time because my
Mm-hmm.
wife was in the army. So we lived all over the place. And when the plague years came and they pitched my kids out of school, and so suddenly I'm
Right.
homeschooling my kids and all this stuff, I was like, yeah, screw it. People are dying. I'm just going to go indie.
Yeah.
I like to have that creative control anyway. And so I put the first book out, Shadow of Wolves, and it's currently sitting at 4.5 stars on Amazon. It's got over 200 reviews. Um, Not too long after I put it out, I had the audiobook done. I hired an amazing narrator named Micah Mason, who's done work for Netflix and things like that.
Oh
And
wow.
and man, he knocked it out of the park.
See the
And
same one
so,
that did the voice of Bounty of the Bones too? He
yep,
has a
same guy.
he has a pretty good voice then, yeah.
Yeah, I figure he's going to be my guy, unless he raises his prices and I can't afford him, or if I write a female main character, then I might go with a female narrator. But for every project I've got on the burners right now, he's going to be the guy. But I did that and it was going well. So I thought, all right, I'm going to write the next one. I'm going to go right into the sequel. And then the sequel was Hail of Brimstone, and that one just fell out of me. It
Yeah.
was it was literally a year between publication of Shadow of Wolves and publication of Hail of Brimstone, with with coming back from pre-readers and proofreaders, beta readers, and doing my polishing and all that, and it was just went great. And then I had about a 3-year gap between Hail of Brimstone and my most recent full-length novel, Fortress of the Damned. Now, in that 3 years is when I put the Bounty and the Bones out, um, and so the comments caught me off guard there for a second.
Yeah,
Is the
Justin has joined us.
the J in
Also on.
JR is also Justin.
Yeah, yeah. So we've got like so we got
So I
two
saw hi
Justins
Justin.
and
I'm
a
like, oh, who's that?
Josh right now. So
So so that's just kind of how it happened. That's how it became indie. Was just sort of seeing the opportunity, seeing what was going on in the world, and realizing, I shouldn't be waiting this long on this dream. I shouldn't be waiting for somebody else to, throw me a line. I'm just going to go do it. I was a guy who sailed over the horizon. I was a guy who got into a cage to
hmm
fight other grown men, which I don't recommend, but it, can be fun. So, so I was, I just thought I'll just do it. I'll just go indie. And, and since then it's just been been an interesting adventure. And I've really enjoyed the feedback from readers and listeners, I look forward to doing this for a long time.
Yeah, well, kind of a similar thing with me when I decided to do this really late in life. It was about 2 years ago. I decided, you know what? I've always thought about writing. My New Year's resolution for 2023 is just to write something, write some book, and I wrote one for almost for practice purposes, and then I decided I was going to write one for real. Did with you, I sent it out to about 3 or 4 publishers. Never heard a thing from any of them, and finally decided, well, let's just try and self-publish it and see what happens. And then year later, I spewed out another one, and yeah, it's what do you think the biggest challenges of being an indie author? I kind of already know the answer to that, but for those out there that probably be curious.
Well, just, yeah, as you know, like, you are your own PR machine.
Hmm.
There's nobody but you pushing you out to the world. Now, I've been fortunate along the way to have, a handful of just really great friends and really great fans, who have read all the books and reviewed
Right,
all of them and tell people about them. And so the word of mouth is huge, but you're still, you're it. Like, you're the website
right.
guy. You're the guy that does the emailings. You're the guy that does the YouTube videos. You're the guy that creates the ads and the thumbnails. So the trick there is just the immense workload of stuff that is to promote your writing, but that ironically takes you away from your writing, because you
Hmm.
got to go do that stuff when, instead of writing. So you have the scheduling issues with all that. But on the other hand, you do have the creative freedom to do it how you want, and so I rarely run up against
Right.
something where there's another person telling me you can't do it this way, or you can't, do this or that. Well, actually, only once have I had a thing where I went to do something and some entity said no. And that was, I went to do lock screen ads on Kindle
Hmm.
for Shadow of Wolves, and Amazon kicked it back and said, no, you can't use this cover. I was like, well, why can't I use the cover? You print the book for me. You're
Right.
advertising all over the place with this cover. Why can't I use it on lock screens? Well, it violates our stance on violence. And I'm like, I go, okay, well, how so? Well, somebody's pointing a gun at someone. And I'm just going to show you the cover.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see the cover here. Okay. Like
So
increase.
this one's a little dark because it's the matte hardcover.
Well, for starters, he is pointing. I mean, that could be a wallet. He's trying to throw the wolf there. I don't know. It
He's
doesn't look like, and even so, it's not at a person. It's at a werewolf.
Yeah,
Who
it's at
isn't
a
going to try
werewolf.
and fire a gun at a werewolf?
Yeah, I don't know if that one shows up any better being the glossy cover, but him pointing that six gun at the
Really?
werewolf, which, is a pretty natural thing to do
Yeah.
when you're
Like,
being attacked by a werewolf and you have a gun.
mm-hmm.
But no, they
Hence,
didn't like that.
especially if it has a silver bullet in it, it
Yeah,
comes in kind of handy. You're not going to just throw the bullet at him. You're going to have to fire a gun
yeah.
weapon.
So they got upset about that, but luckily my artist, who I've used for all of my books except for The Bounty and the Bones,
Mm-hmm.
um, she was fantastic, and I just wrote to her and I said, "Hey, what would you charge to do me an alternate cover? Just make the handgun into a lantern." And she's like, "I don't know, $50, So
Right.
she made me a new cover where instead of pointing the gun, he's holding up a lantern, and that's the cover for. I think that remains the cover for the Kindle edition, so that I can advertise it on lock screen for Kindle, because apparently werewolves are people.
What is all right? And I'm still kind of new to this. What is lock screen exactly, or maybe explain to our audience too what lock? I'm 50 years old, so I wouldn't know what lock screen is
So,
probably.
like when you first, like, wake up your phone or tablet or
Hmm.
computer, and it shows you a picture that
Oh,
isn't right. That's the
Right.
lock screen that you
Okay.
then like, swipe past or whatever. So, and I haven't used that method of advertising in a while, but I assume it still exists on Kindle, where you pick it up, wake it up, and before you swipe it open, it shows you an ad.
Okay.
Yeah, so those were the lock screen ads. And that was a thing I was trying for a little while for Shadow of Wolves.
Excellent. Awesome. So what's it, so is the Bounty of the Bones, is that your newest release?
My newest release is Fortress of the Damned.
Okay.
So the three the three full length novels that I've done are all a series, and the main character is this vagabond gunfighter named Kit Barker, who
Right.
has a really dark past and only gets along with kind of a few people. And the first three full length novel all follow Kit Barker, so the Kit Barker series, and then the Bounty and the Bones takes place in the same universe, but is not, it doesn't involve Kit Barker. Other than that,
Okay.
there's a scene where my main character, the bounty hunter Harlan Slade in Bounty and the
Mhm.
Bones, has uh, wanted posters, and one of them is for Kit Barker. Right, so
Okay.
that's one of the little Easter eggs that you'd get, if you'd read the other books. So it's one that's kind of like, Kit Barker 2.3,
Right.
just kind of nestled in. So it stands alone, but it's in the same world, um, and who knows, maybe crusty old Harlan Slade and his 10 gauge shotgun will run up into Kit Barker sometime. But
I did that a little bit with my second book, where I had a character from my previous book kind of have like a brief, I guess is what in the movies you would call a cameo, just happened to be in a certain scene just to give
yeah,
like a little wink and a nod. So for those who had read the first book, that, oh, I remember that character. That's kind of cool. He's grown up now. He's not a teenager anymore or whatever. And yeah, that's always fun. Now these
yeah.
stories are kind of like in the horror western realm, and not my first published book was a horror western. Would you find like fun, or what prompted you to want to do it in that time period?
Well, a couple of things. One, I I loved westerns growing up, especially western books. Like, I think I have everything that Louis L'Amour ever wrote. Um, and it was funny. Like, in some ways, there's some parallels in my life with Louis L'Amour's life. He went to sea, he
Hmm.
fought professionally. He was kind of a jack of all trades kind of thing.
Right.
So I've always kind of had a great admiration for him and his stories. But I also like monsters,
Yeah.
and with the exception of a couple books, he didn't really delve into that kind of thing. But what really kicked me off on writing Shadow of Wolves was, there was a book, and I won't say the name of it, but there was a book when I was in high school that advertised itself as Cowboys versus Monsters. And it had a glowing recommendation from cocaine era Stephen King. And I was like, this is the stuff. Like, I want this. And so I grabbed it, and it was terrible.
Oh
It was a
wow.
huge letdown. It just
Hmm.
did not measure up to what it claimed to be on the cover, right? And I don't blame the author, honestly. I blame whoever did the cover blurb, trying to sell a product that isn't what he
Right.
actually wrote. But like, the Cowboys were actually like Hawaiian hitmen. I mean, it was weird. And there wasn't a monster. It was like swamp gas. So I
Okay.
was like, man, someone ought to write the book I thought this was. Oh, well, I'm
Oh.
someone. so so I decided I'm gonna write the book I wanted to read. You know, when this idea of werewolf of cowboys versus monsters, popped up. So that's what kicked off Shadow of Wolves. And Shadow of Wolves originally was just going to be a standalone.
Hmm.
Um, but some things pop up in it that lent themselves to continuing the story. I knew I wasn't done with that main character. Um, and so Hail of Brimstone, followed soon after that, and continues his adventures. Things get a little more otherworldly. He, encounters new creatures and new threats. And then the most recent one, Fortress of the Damned, that just came out,
Mhm.
I think is my I think it's my best work. I'm really happy with it. It is a nasty little
Mhm.
siege tale in the wilderness.
Oh wow.
Um, and that one, the cover on that one's pretty dark as well. But if you can see all the eyes in the dark,
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I like that.
so
That's
that
really good.
one, that one was a lot of fun, to write, and um, I'm really happy with how it turned out. Uh,
Would
uh,
do you think like because I'm this way, with horror and westerns, those are like two genres, whether it's book or film, that are very dependent on having the right atmosphere and the right look.
yes, yeah,
And I think that's, I mean, for me, I think that's why there's such a great blend to do that. I don't know if you feel the same way. That's because the whole time when I wrote my
absolutely,
first book, I'm thinking, all right, I'm thinking like Serge, Clint Eastwood spaghetti western. Only I'm going to throw the headless horseman or Jason Voorhees or whatever, some sort
yeah.
of supernatural being into the mix, and that's just visualizing it kind of influenced my writing of Hangman of Darkness, that story. So do you find the same thing with you?
Yeah, I like to be very descriptive in my writing, almost kind of cinematic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I want people to be able to see in their heads what's going
Right.
on, and I actually try to be as historically accurate to the setting and the time period as I can be. So obviously werewolves and cursed relics
Right.
and
Right.
stuff like that aren't historically accurate, but you're going to shoot at them with a historically accurate gun that functions,
Exactly.
the right way, and you're going to have the same day-to-day problems that people in that time period, would have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that actually makes it really easy to have, more fully fleshed out complex characters because you have this great setting to work with,
Oh
in the
yeah.
old west. And so my first one is in like 1874, 75.
Right.
So they're just making the switch from cap and ball black powder firearms to cartridge firearms. And you're seeing things like in one part of the story, they have to go to Flagstaff, Arizona. And when I'm writing it, I'm like, okay, I'm going to reach out to the Historical Society of Flagstaff, Arizona, and tell them, hey, what can you tell me about the city of Flagstaff,
Mm-hmm.
in 1874? And what they told me after I'd already planned on using that location and writing some things was that in 1874 it didn't exist.
Good
they
thing.
Instead, they're like, there was a semi-permanent encampment called Antelope Springs where the locals had stripped all of the branches off of this huge pine tree and put a flag on it. And so the name Flagstaff came from people saying, I'll see you at the Flagstaff in Antelope Springs.
I see.
So I was like, oh crap, I'm glad I asked, and I was able to rework that and everything. But it's that sort of thing. I want it to be as historically real as possible, um, because then when you throw in the horror element,
Right.
um, you get a better reaction from your characters, right? And it'll feel more real.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I do that too with see whether I knew it at the time, but it seems like I'm like hooked on doing like period pieces and whatnot, and I find myself where I need to go back and do some research. And if I'm writing a particular, okay, what was it like in the early 1600s Romania? What kind of stuff was going on during that time, or so forth? And yeah, I mean, requires a little extra work, but I think there's a really big payoff to it once if you can pull it off.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is worth it. Maybe, man, it'll suck you down some rabbit holes sometimes.
Hmm.
I
Yeah, you'll find
I
out some stuff you never knew happened.
Yeah, and I had one where I was like, I just got to find out when the telegraph service began in La Paz, Baja California, down in Mexico, and I never did find out. But in trying to figure that out, I actually got some great story ideas and some things that ended up incorporated into my second novel, Hail of Brimstone.
Excellent. So when you like develop a character, like let's say Kit Barker, is there is there like a specific, I guess, way you like to develop a character? You just try to, how do you go about developing your characters?
Well, there's my mom's gonna watch this, and this is gonna terrify her, but there's a lot of me in Kit Barker.
Okay.
Um, but but yet also, wildly different. His backstory is nothing like my backstory. I'd like the authorities to know that. Um, but what I try to do is, what is the main motivation of this character? Like, what is their core personality? Are they a hard person? Are they a weak person? Are they primarily loving? Are they primarily hate driven? What is kind of the core of who they are? And then it's largely a matter of how would they react to how would they react to this situation that I'm going to put them in.
Hmm.
How are they going to react to this environment that I'm going to put them in, given the core personality of them that I've now established. Like there's a scene in the beginning of Hail of Brimstone where I needed Barker to leave a location, right? And so all this stuff happens and blah blah blah, and I'm thinking, okay, he's gonna get spooked, he's gonna leave, right, et cetera, et cetera. And then the character just goes, "I'm not running," because he wouldn't. And
Yep.
I'm like, well, crap, man. I All right,
That's
fine, we'll figure it out, right? But
that's
it
an
is one of
example of a character taking over the story. Yeah, I've been there.
yeah, where it's like, it's like that. I mean, that's what he would say. He would say, "I'm not running." It's like, all right, great, fine, we're gonna have to do it on your terms now, then, I guess, Barker. So, but that actually made for a great story, to not force it. So that's most of what I do is, as far as character development, as far as building a character,
Mm-hmm.
um, is that kind of thing. Sometimes I'll base him on people that I knew. Um, Sometimes he'll be like an amalgam of several people. I've got a character in the second book, Gallus Mag, who is actually based on a folklore character,
Mm-hmm.
Gallus Mag. And I lifted her last name and her tattoos from a girl I knew in high school. You know, there's a character in Hail of Brimstone and in Fortress of the Damned who is this bombastic like railway baron, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's a rich man who pulled himself up by his bootstraps, etc. And he's actually based on and named after the first guy who ever hired me to do cage fighting for his promotion.
Oh
Like the
wow.
first guy to give me a chance, in the cage was a guy named Gamst. And so there's a character that's a little bit inspired by him and that bears part of his name.
Excellent. Yeah, I find that too. I kind of like base. I mean, I may base a character a little bit loosely on myself, at least certain personalities, and I'll think about other people I've met, or even when I like think about when I'm like thinking about the character, what they look like, I'll think of like if I like see some cosplay model online or something, you see quite a few of them go, oh, that one there could easily looks like the character I'm writing. And I'll start
Yeah,
describing them like, yeah, this one here, this character as she stepped out had her whole backside tattooed or something like that. And
yeah,
it'll like pop in my head, or I'll use I'll sometimes, I don't know if you do this, but as I'm writing, I'm kind of like picturing it like I'm watching a movie. So I'll automatically will start taking actors and actresses and start casting them. Like, okay, if who would I want to play this part
yeah,
or this part? And that kind of influences how they start writing the character sometimes.
Yeah, I've 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 definitely done some of that. Um, Unfortunately, if they ever make a movie out of any of my books, a lot of the guys that I cast in my head don't look like that anymore. You know, I have a character. I have a character that's kind of uh, a companion of Kit Barker, who's almost his conscience in some
Hmm.
ways, right?
Right.
Who is he's biracial. He's Navajo and Mexican,
Okay.
and so he of course faces some discrimination for that in the Old West. And so since they're both kind of outcasts, him and Barker get along well.
Hmm.
And his name's John Swiftrunner. And in my head, he looks like Eric Schweg, who is the actor that played in Last of the Mohicans
Okay.
as the younger Mohegan, as Uncas, I think was the character's name, right? Just
Uh-huh.
like, real handsome, guy in his like 20s, etc. Well, Eric Schweg is like, I think he's pushing 60 now,
Well, yeah,
you know?
easily.
So in my head, Swift Runner still looks a lot like, young Eric Schweg from Last of the Mohicans. But he's not
Interesting.
available for casting.
No, interesting that as you were describing that character, automatically my head, I popped in my head was Lou Diamond Phillips in Young Guns.
Yeah.
Cause just
Yeah.
because his character was like half Hispanic, half Navajo, I think, or some form of native tribe, and
Yeah.
automatically, of course, he too's got to be in his 60s by now, I would think, or close to it.
Yeah, he's getting up there a bit. He's still doing all right. I think last thing I saw him in was Longmire,
Hmm.
which was like sort of a Western cop show. He did a good job in that.
Yep. So what? All right. So for anyone that's out there that's thinking about writing or is fairly new to writing, what advice would you give to any new writers, specifically indie writers?
Um, well, one thing I think right off the bat is start. Like just start writing something. It doesn't even matter if it's crap and it's crap, right? Start. Um, it would be like if somebody said, hey, I want to get stronger. All right, cool. Start working out. Well, I'm not going to be good at it. Fine, start. Right? Nobody starts good at anything.
No.
Um, and if you think that you started good at something, you just don't know how far you can actually go. So, right off the bat, I'd say, get started. Start writing. I would also say write write the stuff that you want to read, right? Don't worry about writing what you think is selling. Don't worry about writing what you think other people want. Like write the stuff that you want to read. um, because if you want to read it, somebody else wants to read it, right? So so do that. Create what you want. Work at it. And then another thing I would say, especially for indies, is just remember that you can't write for everyone, right?
Exactly.
um and I was actually fortunate, and I've consistently gotten good reviews. All of my stuff sits at about 4.5 stars, or better on Amazon. So I've been fortunate to have readers who like what I'm writing, and if they don't, they at least just don't say so. but um, but I was fortunate early on when I had just published Shadow of Wolves, and I was getting all these 4 and 5 star reviews. I'm like, oh, great, great, great. Out of the blue, I got a 1 star review from a guy who he hated me, right? He
Right.
hated me and he hated the horse I rode in on. And like, he wrote this diatribe. I actually
Wow.
screenshotted it and kept it. It was
Okay.
beautiful, right? Um, but like clearly just out of his mind. I remember one of the things he said was that I used the word viscous too much, right?
Okay.
And that I used it wrong. So I pulled up my manuscript. I did a word search. I use it twice in the whole book. And I'm like, man, this guy's just off his gourd. Um, and I was actually really fortunate to get this nasty, ugly review so early,
Uh-huh.
um, because it really sort of like broke me of caring too much about that kind of thing, right? Because there's always going to be someone who
Well,
doesn't
yeah.
like what you do, and there's always going to be someone who loves what you do. So just do what you do.
Yeah, you have to kind of balance it. I mean, I like it when I learn, I think you'll agree that as a writer, you never stop learning.
Yeah,
You're always looking to improve, and shortly, and sometimes getting, feedback from beta readers can be sometimes difficult because I kind of think they
yeah,
want to kind of like hit you with kid gloves. Fortunately, I found one that said, your story is terrific and all that. You're a good storyteller, and I love the characters, but you need to do this, this, and that. You need to add more to this and that. And I really
yeah,
appreciated that. That they gave me some compliments, but then they gave me the critiques, which kind of softens the blow a
yeah,
little bit.
and
At least I know now what I need to do next time, or to go
yeah,
back, because editing
yeah.
is the worst part. I think
Oh
of
yeah,
writing is
and when I talk about, don't get worried about negative things other people say. I'm talking about like reviewers after you've
right,
published.
right.
I'm very fortunate to have a couple of beta readers
Hmm.
um, that don't pull any punches, and I know that they've made, especially Fortress of the Damned, my most recent one. I
Hmm.
know they made some things, much better in the book just by going like, hey, you can do this bigger. Hey, you can make this nastier and scarier.
Right.
Take a bigger risk here. You know, and and then they're invaluable for plot holes. You know,
Hmm.
because you're always going to have some plot holes in your first second draft.
Right.
And so just having red pen somewhere going like, yeah, this is a problem. You need to fix this. You need to sort out this obvious issue. Gives you that chance to rectify it, before it goes to market. Um, or if they say things like, "Man, you're beating a dead horse with this point," like you can trim this back. Like, so
Right.
those guys that don't pull any punches, the beta readers and stuff, they're worth their weight in gold. Um,
Oh,
but
for
once
sure.
you're done and you're happy with it, and you send it out into the wild. You know, oh well.
Yeah, then it's there, and yeah, and so who were are some, like, maybe your favorite writers, and what are some of your favorite books that you've read, or writers that you like reading?
So one that affected me a lot as a kid was Stephen King.
Hmm.
And honestly, I kind of fell away from him over the years. I haven't read as much of his recent stuff. But like, when I was in high school, man, like Misery,
Hmm. Yeah.
his book Misery, I remember I wouldn't I wouldn't walk through my darkened living room because I was worried Annie Wilkes was going to pop up from behind the couch and lop my head off,
Oh,
you know.
wow.
Um, and a lot of his stories, stuck with me. Um, like Night Shift,
Hmm.
which is where they go down the successive levels
Right.
with the increasingly bizarre bat monsters and stuff. Like, great creature feature stuff. Survivor Type was a short story of his where a guy on a desert island slowly consumes himself. And that was one that's like, holy crap, man. It just sticks with you. I also liked, Dean Koontz, the
Hmm.
Watchers books, that kind of stuff. I like some of the more sort of speculative horror, whereas like sort of horror and sci-fi intersects. So like
Hmm.
Neanderthal by John Saul,
Oh, yeah, of course.
you know, like that was a cool one. Um, as far as the series that I've most consistently read, they're more of thrillers, but they tend to pretty consistently have elements of horror. Is the Pendergast series by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child.
Okay.
That's an interesting series because sometimes they're thrillers and there's no monster, and then other
Hmm.
times there's like a genetic mutant, killer creature thing. Um, and those were cool. Their first book that they wrote together was The Relic, and that was actually made into a pretty decent horror movie.
Oh, I
Um,
remember that movie with
yeah,
Tom
yeah,
Sizemore, I think, back in the
yeah, with
90s.
Tom
Yeah.
Sizemore and
Mhm.
and the giant monster creature, the Cathoga,
Right.
or whatever. I was fortunate that I saw that movie before I read the book.
Hmm.
If you do it the other way around and like the book, it ruins the movie a little bit because the movie cut the main character of the book out.
Oh,
So
really?
the movie is like if you read the book first and you go see the movie, it's like going to see a Batman movie and the whole movie is about Commissioner Gordon and Batman doesn't show up, right? It's
Oh,
it's
great.
on it's on that level. But but I was fortunate I saw the movie first and it's still, it still holds up pretty well. I like it.
Yeah, I haven't
I
seen
like all
that
the
one in a
big.
long time, but I remember seeing it in the theaters way shortly after it came out, I remember. So yeah, that
Yeah.
was a good movie. Speaking of movies, I mean, we talked about Friday the 13th Part 2 being one of the earlier movies you kind of sort of watched, even though you were like more or less reacting. What were some of your other like early horror movie favorites besides Friday the 13th?
So, I liked all the Universal horror movies, monsters, the black and
Where I
white.
started.
I still think that the Invisible Man, the original Invisible Man is just really good. Um, then they did the Kevin Bacon Hollow Man,
Hmm.
right? And I thought that was pretty good. I remember seeing that when it first came out. Um, and that was pretty solid. I love all the werewolf movies. So, of course, American Werewolf in London. Um, I also saw American Werewolf in Paris, which suffers greatly in comparison.
Oh, I'm sure.
You
Yeah,
know,
it does.
and then of course all the underworld movies. And
Oh yeah,
where you get
that
a
was
nice mix of
vampires and
action and
werewolves for sure. Were you a
yeah,
big fan of The Howling? At least the first one, anyway.
yes, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
actually watching through all the Howling sequels at the moment.
I've
I'm
only
up
seen
to
the first two so far. I don't know if I'm gonna make it to three or not.
I'm up to Howling 6, The Freaks, I think. Something like
Okay.
that. It is getting to be a little bit of a slog, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
But the first Howling, I'm a big fan of. In fact, I think I've got, yeah, right here on my shelf. I've actually got Gary
Oh
uh,
wow.
Bratner's books, The Howling, the trilogy. Um, I haven't had a chance to read through that yet, but I got that a few years ago now. My to be read list is enormous. Um,
Oh, same
but I
here.
got that because I liked the films, so much.
Hmm.
So I really like the first Howling is great. Um, part two uh, is a very different tone, you
That's
know.
true. Well, it has Christopher Lee, so it's definitely going to be watchable just because he's in it.
Yeah, because he's
Uh,
in it. But like the I
the
watched it
ending is
again
so
recently.
weird.
Well, like in the credits, like the credits sequence is hilarious because it's mostly Sybil Danning ripping her top off, right?
Yeah, about 10 or 12 times they keep on showing the
Yeah,
same scene.
and yeah, so she exposes herself, and then it cuts to Christopher Lee going, "Whoa," or to some other person in the movie who wasn't in that scene reacting. It's like okay,
Oh, that
but
was the 80s for you.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
so
I can't reach it from here, but up on the wall, I have a picture, autographed picture from Dee Wallace, showing a picture from The Howling that I got
nice, yeah.
autographed by her about almost a year ago that I went and met her at a horror convention. So,
Oh, cool. Yeah, it's there's an actress who kind of spans generations a little bit because I primarily remember her from The Howling, And was she in Critters?
Oh, let me look that up.
She might have been in the first Critters movie, but my kids,
I
I
know
have
she was
two.
in Cujo, and then a lot of normies would know her from E.T.
Oh, that's right, she was the mom in ET. But yeah,
Yeah.
my kids primarily know her as this loving grandmother character on this children's show about cooking and magic, right? So they're like, "Oh, look at the
She
sweet
was in
grandma."
Critters, by the way.
Okay. So like they're like, "Look at this, look at this cute grandmother character. She's so sweet and loving." And I'm like, "Yeah, I saw her shoot critters in the face with a shotgun the other day."
They should see her in Rob Zombie's Lords of Salem. They'll see a different side of her there. Just bashed
that
this
is
guy's
kind of
head
a
in.
that is kind of a gap in my horror resumes. I haven't seen much of Rob Zombie's stuff. And I know that there's going to be a portion of folks in the comments going, you're not missing anything. And a portion of the people in the comments going, dude, you're missing everything,
Yeah,
but I just
he's
haven't
a
seen a lot of it.
very. I'll say this. I like most of his movies. I don't think there's any movies he's made that I hated. Um, he came out at the right time for me because when he came out with like House of a Thousand Corpses, I thought at that time horror had gotten too clean looking, I guess you could say. Maybe a little bit too, almost too mainstream.
Yeah, a little
And
manicured.
yeah, and he kind of made it dingy and dirty again a little bit. And then shortly thereafter, James Wan came out with Saw. You had Eli Roth with Hostel. And whether you like that stuff or not, it at least attempted to kind of bring horror back to being a little bit more taboo than it was. We were going through that period with the late 90s into the early 2000s. And, I
Yeah,
think
and
his best works House of a Thousand Corpses. And I think Lords of Salem is his second best one, at least for me
okay.
anyway.
I think I've only seen his take on the first Halloween, on his first Halloween movie. Interesting enough, I believe it's Tyler Mane that plays Michael Myers in that,
Yep.
correct?
Yeah, and I see
So
Justin just mentioned both the Halloween films, which I both like as well.
he says even Halloween 1 and 2. So maybe I need to give Rob Zombie another shot and see some other stuff.
You just
But
have to look at it from a different lens, especially with the Halloween films. I'll say this, and got back in October, we had this big, long Halloween franchise discussion. And one of the points I had made about his movies, what I'll say is, yes, Carpenter's original and the first two movies, which really isn't Carpenter, but he still wrote it. He hates Halloween 2. But point I made is, yes, they are better films. I think I like them better. But there's some things about the Rob Zombie films that I thought he did a little bit better. I thought some of the characters in the remake are better. Like I think Sheriff Brackett, who in the zombie films is played by Brad Dourif. I think he's a better Sheriff Brackett than Charles Cyphers is, just because he had a little bit more to do. Danielle Harris, I think, is a little bit better as Annie than Nancy Loomis was.
yeah,
And once again, she was given a little bit more to do, particularly in the second one. But so there are some positive things about the zombie films. They're going to be a little bit more grittier. The second one gets a little bit too crazy. There's some supernatural elements, we'll say, that probably didn't need to be in the movie, but are. But that might have been the Weinstein's button in too, because they made his life a living
yeah,
hell
I
making those
yeah, I
movies.
do know that I do know that he had a lot of interference on some of his
Mm-hmm.
projects. Um, I think part of that is just studios, and I think this is also something you see with publishers too, which is one of
Oh
the
yeah.
reasons I've been fortunate, I think, to do indie, is that they want to play it safe,
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh yeah.
if you get somebody who has something like a unique perspective on things, right, which Rob Zombie obviously does, you just got to let him run with it. And
Yep.
if it ends up being a giant flop, all right, just don't give him any more money, right? But otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
let him swing the bat. Um, but they're kind of scared to do that, I think.
Well, yeah, and that's why I would say like I felt like with the newer Halloween films that came out recently, I thought they played it maybe too safe with them. It just feels like they were just recycling Halloween H2O again, is what it felt like to
Yeah,
me. And they spread it out through three movies. And those ones, and I know a lot of people love those films, but they didn't really quite work for me. But
yeah,
but at least there
yeah,
are, at least we're seeing where whether it's 824 allowing directors to do whatever they want to, whether it works for not, because they don't, their movies don't always work for me either. At least they're letting them have the freedom to make what they want. Obviously,
yeah,
Damien Leone has hit a gold mine with Terrifier, whether you like those movies or not. They're good for, they're hitting it out of the ballpark in the box office, so which is good
yeah,
for horror overall.
yeah. As a whole, I haven't seen any of the Terrifier movies. Um, my as far as slasher films, I've seen all of the Nightmare on Elm
Hmm.
Street, except for the remake. I think Jackie Earl Haley is great, but I don't know. I just didn't want to see somebody else's Freddy Krueger.
Right.
And uh, all of the Friday the 13th. Um, I'm gonna be honest. My my favorite Friday the 13th are probably Jason X and Freddy versus Jason because
Jason X is getting more and more love over the years, I think. I think people are now
it
looking back, and I
yeah,
liked it when it came out, and it's, I
yeah,
don't know,
it
it's in the
that
middle of
is
the pack for me, but
that's the only one that I think I saw in theaters. Like I think me
hmm.
and my wife actually went and saw it in theaters. And for me, the premise was great because it was like, we're way in the future. We got this guy that is a real problem and just can't be killed. So we're going to shoot him into space. And I was like, that actually makes great sense.
I think it does. I mean, they decided to
Right?
do
Like,
something a little bit different. They just changed the setting, and you still
yeah.
had some of your typical tropes in that movie, and
Yeah.
then I, yeah, it movie works for me.
Yeah.
You
I
got
thought
the,
I thought it was fun.
yeah, it was. And most of those, I think, like I always say, Hellraiser and Halloween might be my favorite series, but I will concede that Friday the 13th is consistently a better series because I don't think there's really, maybe with exception of maybe Manhattan and Jason Goes to Hell, there really aren't too many big misses in that series. Everything is at least
Yeah, they're
watchable
pretty
and enjoyable. I can watch them
yeah,
again and
they're
again.
pretty consistent. And I'm not a big slasher fan, in
Hmm.
general. Like I like monsters,
Right.
I like werewolves and monsters. My favorite horror movie ever is The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing, just
That's
because I
my
love
fourth favorite of all
practical
time, but yeah.
I love practical effects. To this day, nothing looks quite as good, in my opinion, as practical effects, as real light hitting something
Agree.
that really exists, you know. But yeah, I mean the Friday the 13th movies, like what you're getting going in, and they rarely
Hmm.
disappoint you. The last kind of slasher type movie that I watched was actually, it was a Polish, I think, movie out on Netflix. It was No One Sleeps in the Woods Tonight.
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it. But
Yeah,
it's probably one of those movies
um,
that's in my watch list of about 100 movies I
yeah,
still need to watch.
it's it's pretty good, and they made a sequel, and the sequel's pretty good too. The sequel drifts into like horror comedy, which I enjoy. I know some guys would,
Mhm.
would probably be like, well, the tone shift is wonky.
Yeah.
Um, but man, you want to talk about tone shift? Evil Dead, and then the tone shift to Army of Darkness.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah, I
Well, it's like
remember
going
me and
from Escape from New York to Escape from LA.
yeah, it's just like this isn't quite the same. I saw Army of Darkness first,
Yeah, okay.
and I was like, man, this is a great character. I got to find out more about this guy, and then the movies are going to be they're going to be fun. They're going to be upbeat, chipper
Hmm.
rides. And then you put in Evil Dead 1. It's like, holy crap, man.
This is totally different. And then
Yeah.
Evil Dead 2, of course, starts getting, which is
Yeah.
essentially a remake of the first one,
Yeah.
is basically a campier, a goofier version of the first one. And then Army of Darkness just goes full
Yeah.
blown camp for the
But
most
man,
part.
the first Evil Dead movie and Robert Rodriguez's it's not a horror film, but his movie El Mariachi,
Hmm.
those two films are a great lesson in sort of guerrilla filmmaking and like getting the most out of very little, you know,
Oh,
with the
absolutely.
tricks they use to film it. Like Robert Rodriguez did this technique where he would have two cameras and he would zoom in and out with one and zoom in and out with the other so that when he cut it in editing he could make it look like a four camera shot, or you had things like in Evil Dead, um stuff like Sam Raimi having a T, a 2x4 constructed
Hmm.
T just out of frame so that he could smash a window and go through it with his camera. I just think that kind of stuff is really cool. Because as writers, even though we're working in the written word as our medium,
Right.
we're still storytellers, and I think that's one of the reasons we can appreciate horror movies and horror books so well. It's because it's all storytelling.
Yeah. And it doesn't always have to be. I always say it's like you mentioned how there's like, if you get the right group of people together, there's no bad horror movies. I always say it always depends on the context of what type, because there's so many different subgenres. You can't
Yeah.
judge Friday the 13th chapter 3 in the same way that you would judge, say, a Robert Eggers movie like The
Oh
Witch
yeah.
or Nosferatu. You have to kind of
Yeah.
judge them in their own context and what type of story they're trying to tell.
Yeah. Horror as a genre, I think, is so much more broad than a lot of
Hmm.
the other genres. Um, that's what I think is funny, where you could get two horror fans together who both just absolutely love horror, and each of them will name their favorite movie, and the other guy will actually hate that movie, right? Like you'll get you'll get guys that be like, "Oh, I love horror," "Oh, no, not that stuff. There's something wrong with you. I like this stuff." "Oh, yeah, cool, cool. Good luck with your therapist." Like
Yeah.
there's such a it because uh, fear and apprehension and the stuff that horror likes to provoke is so subjective.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, that it
And
just
how you do that too is also subjective on how you accomplish that. And well, I
yeah,
wouldn't. So that's why I'll never, even if a particular movie doesn't work for me or I didn't quite like it, if they did try to do something unique or do something different or whatever, or they try to push the envelope, I'll never come down on a filmmaker for trying to go all balls out, so to speak. So
yeah,
even like the Terrifier movies aren't quite for me. I think they do go a little bit, but I'm not gonna uh, shit on them because at least they are trying to disrupt people's emotions or
yeah,
disturb them a little bit while they're playing with that line. And Zombie kind of does this in his movies too, where you don't know whether or not you should be rooting for the villain or cheering them, because
yeah.
if you start cheering on, you start, ooh, why am I cheering this on?
Yeah.
And then
Well,
he kind of plays with that a little bit.
yeah. Well, like, an example of kind of things like, of course, like in A Clockwork Orange,
Hmm.
there's this scene where the guys break into the house and are attacking people and doing all this horrible stuff. And the soundtrack is playing something like, Singing in the Rain,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
something very like pleasant.
Yeah. And it's because the director was like, I don't want to tell you whether you should be horrified or not with the soundtrack.
Hmm.
I want I want the watcher to make up their mind. Um, and so that's kind of something that sort of stuck with me. Is this idea that you just let the reader decide who's the hero, who's the villain. Let the you know let the viewer, of a horror movie decide
Right.
who's the hero, who's the villain. Um, I am kind of a sucker for when the humans win, though. I like,
I think most of us are. Well, we all like underdog stories, and I think that's
yeah,
why, whether it's a final girl or final guy, if it's somebody that's, you would think it should not be surviving and they somehow overcome it. That's just kind of a reflection of us ourselves rooting for the
Yeah.
underdog, because it's like you go to Jaws, for example. Chief Brody is literally a fish out of water on that boat with
Yeah.
Quint and Hooper, but yet he's the one that gets to blow up the shark. And, you could play that on and on and on with whichever character you want to that ends up surviving, but probably
Yeah.
you wouldn't think they should in the beginning.
Yeah. I like Jaws as a guy who was a sailor, and
Oh,
my degree is actually in marine biology.
okay.
Um, yeah, so like I like Jaws. You're not supposed to like Jaws if you're a marine biologist, because you're supposed to be like, oh, it unfairly demonizes sharks, and it's like, okay, but it's a movie,
Yeah.
like it's like nobody watches, it and goes, this unfairly demonizes clowns, you know.
Or
It's
Terrifier.
like,
Well, and as
yeah, or
I think
Terrifier.
clowns have been like demonized more times in horror movies than any other thing, and I
I
don't think
know, man.
anyone has been going around, going
Yeah,
vigilante on clowns yet that I'm aware of, anyway. So,
yeah.
oh well. Well, I think that's going to be it for tonight. Speaking of it, but Jr., thanks for coming on. What other projects do you have? Anything else coming up next?
Well, I'm working on the sequel to Fortress of the Damned.
Okay.
Um, each of my books is meant to be kind of a standalone story, but as they progress more and more, they're pointing you to the next book. And after Fortress of the Damned, the fourth book is going to kind of wrap up the big background arc that's been going on, sort of behind the scenes. So you were able to listen to The Bounty and the Bones.
Right. Hmm.
So how there's this strange emblem on the box, in
Right.
that story, and how there's references to, well, where did you get this map? Oh, we got it from this weird guy who was pale and called everybody sinner, right? Those emblems and these sort of sinister background characters have been leading the way, and leading the way toward this fourth book. And that's that's what I'm working on now, is wrapping up the big 4-book arc, everything coming to a head for Kit Barker and his companions, facing this new threat of the Fleshbender and the Legion below, and all these things they're going to have to deal with. And then once I've finished that arc, I do have plans for a new arc after that, but I may try to crank out some work in the interim. I've got a nasty little retro sci-fi horror story
Oh
that
wow.
I'm working on, that I'll probably release between the next book and picking up, the fifth Kit Barker book. And it's going to be pretty cool. The working title is Mechanism of Death, and I'm excited about it. It's fully formed. It's going to take place in a not a dystopian future, but kind of a amalgam of near future, yet like 1940s pot boiler. So it's going to
Oh,
be
cool.
like retro noir, kind of deal. Like, when you see like Robert A. Heinlein's, work, and like the drawings they put on the cover of those in like the 60s,
Right.
imagining from the 60s what the future would be like, is going to be like that kind of thing. So I'm excited to get that one out, but I'm going to get this next Kit Barker one out for everybody first.
All right. Sounds really good. That sounds exciting. So, okay, and thank you for everyone in the chat for watching tonight. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't. Also, this video will stay on if you in case you miss it live. It'll still be on YouTube, and I'll also be releasing it on Spotify on Monday. So we got Storyteller at Lars. Thanks for coming up. Awesome. That would be
Yeah,
you.
that's me. Yeah.
There you
My
go.
YouTube channel is Storyteller at Large. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So people check that out. Also check out his authors page, J.R. White, author on Amazon. He has this whole page there showing all of his books. I have the link in the description. And we will see everyone here probably in a couple weeks. And we'll talk to you later. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Okay. Excellent. That went